What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Lioneye or Watch podcast. With me, I have my two co-hosts, Hedgie and PC.
Co-hosts, we're cool.
Yeah, you're pretty cool. And as a special thing tonight, we had Chris Wilson, also known as Chris. This is above Wilson. He is gracing us with his presence, the lead developer from Grinding Gear Games, and he's here for a talk about anything Atlas and Essence League. Thank you for joining us tonight, Chris. How are you doing?
You're welcome. It's great to be here. It's pretty early in the morning in New Zealand, but I'm glad to be on the podcast.
Very early. That's dedication. I don't know when I've been up that early last, but thank you for doing it.
So release.
Hedgie, how are you guys doing?
I'm doing great.
I am doing pretty well. It's been a long day, so can't complain.
Eager to hear what Chris has to say.
We're just gonna jump right into it, guys. We have an hour tonight with Chris, and typically we do this podcast for a little more than an hour and a half typically, but we're just gonna restrain ourselves to the or restrict ourselves to the hour tonight. So we'll get into it. Chris, what was the inspiration of Atlas, like the very start of its design? Do you want to talk about that for a bit?
So whenever we plan an expansion, we have a look at what type of player we want to service, because you can design expansions completely for new players. You can design expansions for existing players that do nothing for new players, or ones for returning players, potentially, that tempt people into playing Path of Exile again if they've tried it in the past. And so we figured it was time to give some love to the existing community that have been supported for so long. People that are in maps, and while they enjoy the new acts and stuff that we bring out, they wanted a change to the actual end game that they're grinding for a number of years now. Because we realized that after we introduced maps back in 2013, we haven't really changed maps very much, aside from introducing a couple of new ones over time. And so it was time to actually get out some polish and rejuvenate that system a little bit, especially because maps are kind of the backbone of what's keeping people playing Path of Exile long term.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely some longevity in that. So the way you got to this conclusion, did you have some numbers showing that there was a drop-off around that time, or what was the hard thing that made you decide on focusing on endgame?
So maps have the best retention of content in Path of Exile. Once a player gets to maps, they're pretty safe, right? Like once we've got someone playing maps, we're pretty confident that we've got that user. Having said that, over time, people will still drop off. And so we actually, from a business case, it makes a lot of sense to occasionally focus on polishing that area and making sure it's as tight as we can. And I have some good retention figures so far for Atlas that show that the rate of drop-off in maps is now less than half what it was previously. So this is a major thing, which means that the retention curve for the expansion is very likely to be a different shape than normal, which will be really cool. So we did have numeric reason to do Atlas, but it was also because it was an expansion that people thought was very cool. It was very different than previous ones we've done. We've tried hard to make sure each expansion feels different from the last. For example, Sacrifice of the Val introduced Val side areas and Val skill gems and all the Atzeri content. And that was kind of a nod to high-level players as well, saying, we've released Path of Exile, and other than the maps, there isn't a ton for you to do at the end game, so have some Atzeri stuff to do. And then in Forsaken Masters, we added almost nothing to the end game because we wanted to augment the main body of the game with missions and so on to keep the areas more alive and varied as you go through. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there was the Awakening, where we dropped Act 4 and the duel system and so on. And that's important because the actual playthrough length of Path of Exile at that stage felt relatively constrained with 3 acts before it repeats in Cruel and Merciless, which, of course, is a big topic for discussion. It wasn't quite long enough as an actual single-player playthrough, and we felt that the short length prior to the game repeating dropped a fair number of players who played through for a single-player experience and didn't have enough time to get addicted to it before it repeated itself. Mm-hmm. And so Act 4 was instrumental there. And then, of course, there was Ascendancy, which added a completely new type of content for us. The Labyrinth is unlike anything in similar action RPGs or even in Path of Exile so far. And so finally, the Atlas is an endgame system which hopefully feels different than a new act and feels different from the Labyrinth and feels different from the Master system. And so we're trying hard with each expansion to do some pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah. So with the development time that has gone into making a lot of endgame content, are you afraid that might alienate new players to the games who might have needed some development for that part of the game?
Well, the nice thing about a new player is that they don't know what we've spent time on. They take the game at face value. And so as long as the core game is getting better for a new player, then the experience isn't worse than it was before. What I mean is we could ignore the core game for new players, and a year later it's still a similar experience, regardless of whether you played at a point A or point B. Having said that, we were worried with this expansion that so much effort going into maps meant that for maybe a new/returning player who's played a little bit with their friends, that the game feels a bit too samey. So we made sure that the Essence League was very in their face in terms of something that they can see and experience in most areas as they play through a normal playthrough. And that meant that the game did feel different at face value. We kind of let the Essence League carry quite a lot of the regular player experience in this particular expansion. But it is something to be aware of. And of course, the next big expansion does have a ton of stuff for new players.
Yeah, and I mean, there's only so much to do or so much that can be done at the same time. So,
yeah, I feel like you guys hit the mark. I mean, you guys were very generous with the frequency at which you experience essences, a lot more than my expectations. So, yeah, definitely something there for them. But a question I had was, like, what comes first? Does the lore determine the style of new content, or does new content determine the style of lore? Like, when you guys were thinking of ascendancy classes, did ascendancy classes come first and then you guys concocted a way to get the ascendancy powers through the lab? Like, how does that fit with the overall design process?
So sometimes we find good designs that we really like, and then we have to come up with a story to populate them. An example is Talisman. We knew we wanted to do haunted amulets, which had a kind of a one-ring style feel to them. So we came up with a Talisman lore to explain that. Whereas in the case of, for example, the December Challenge League, we have some really cool lore, and we want to come up with a game mechanic that fits it. And the one that we've chosen we think does a really good job at being a fun way of fitting that. So it can go in either direction, and it really depends whether the lore is stronger or the design is stronger initially, which one wins out and has the other one crafted to fit it. Mm-hmm. In the case of Ascendancy, we actually had the Ascendancy class idea and the Labyrinth as two separate systems. We had in the back of our mind we wanted to do a Labyrinth, and we also had Ascendancy classes that almost made it into the Awakening as a much more toned-down, simple version with, one skill each or something. So we decided to drop that from the Awakening because it wasn't really a good enough system. Like, it needed work. It needed to be fully fleshed out like we eventually did. And so that happened to perfectly fit with the concept of doing a Labyrinth in order to earn your Ascendancy.
Yeah. So I guess things just coincide and eventually they make a whole. Like, how long have you guys actually known that you wanted the Shaper character in the game, for instance?
The Shaper character we came up with after designing the Atlas. We knew we needed a story. We just had to find a good way of fitting it in. So as you can see with the fact that we gave Zana a lot more voice acting and eventually even had to replace her voice actor because the old one wasn't available, there's a small amount of retconning going on where we have to say, actually, this is the story of maps. You just didn't know it all along.
I noticed that one.
Yeah, fair enough.
I did have one of the questions. So related to that, which of the expansions was the most lore-driven, and then which one was the most content-driven, just for example?
This is a good question. So it's difficult to disassociate the two. For example, Forsaken Masters, while it was a design thing where we wanted to have these cool masters and we wanted to have all the missions and the crafting, and we knew exactly how we wanted that to work from a design point of view, it feels like the lore was there the entire time because it just came up in the first conversation. Well, these are other exiles that have grown to mastery of different things, and they're there for you to befriend and work with. So the lore was there from day one, but I still feel that was a design-driven expansion. And likewise, Sacrifice of the Val was very much, okay, we need an expansion after release. What's an evocative bad guy that we can use? And in that case, we definitely said Val Civilization. We're going to go with Queen Atzeri. We're not sure what form that actually takes. Is she an endgame character or what? So Sacrifice of the Val was an extremely lore-driven expansion where we molded the content to fit it. And in many cases, I feel it was one of our weaker expansions. I don't think that's necessarily for this reason. It may just be the way it came out. Val skill gems didn't really quite hit where we wanted to. And sure, they found niche uses years later, but it's not quite the system we had in mind.
Are you saying that you didn't plan on everybody using Val Haste?
Nice. Well, I mean, it's cool that there are a few that are very popular, but by and large, a lot of Val skills are ignored. Like Val Glacial Hammer is one of the coolest things in the game. It traps you in a little arena with the monster that you're trying to kill. Like, it puts a circle of ice around the two of you to fight it out. But no one sees this. The 6% wasn't enough.
Well, so when you have a section of skills, then, for example, the Val skills, where there's certain Val skills that are popular, they're used almost universally, and there's Val arc. What's then the design decision? Why do you, or is this, wait till we can figure out an expansion content where we can make it relevant? Do you want to push the design sooner? Where does this go in kind of the pecking order of design?
So do you mean with regard to trying to fix the situation of some skills being more useful than others?
Exactly, because the issue with Val skills have been a issue for, or at least what you're pointing out has been the case since Val.
Well, there are two things to say here. The first one is that it's not necessarily a problem if more people choose one thing than another. Trying to balance to make everything equal has the problem that you're making the vast majority who want to use the best thing unhappy by reducing it, while also kind of increasing the just bad things in vain. So I don't believe that every skill in the game necessarily needs to be good. It's okay for there to be some bad choices because it's a mastery behavior to evaluate the skill and to say, you know what, this is garbage, I don't want to use it, and to feel good about not using that skill. If we tried, like in the past, we've tried to buff underperforming things, and we'll get a situation where, like with Whirling Blades, for example, this is a great example. Whirling Blades was bad because of desync. It got you killed. But we looked at it numerically, and no one was using this great movement skill. We knew Whirling Blades should be where it's at. It's amazing. So we buffed it and buffed it and buffed it and just kept going, and no one used it. Then we fixed desync, which is the buff it needed. And now everyone's using Whirling Blades, and we're stuck in a situation where all those buffs are unnecessary. We just needed to have the right one. But right now, we can't exactly lobotomize Whirling Blades without getting an uproar from the community. So we have to, that goes on the list of difficult things to sort out in the future. The second point about Val skills is the team have their, like whenever there's a system that's not good, they put together their plan for how they want to fix it. And there's a plan for making Valve skills awesome. There's tons of new ones planned, all that kind of jazz. It just needs approval. It needs us to say this is going in an expansion. But it's more likely that let's overhaul melee targeting is going in an expansion before the Valve skills one, merely because it probably impacts half the player base. And so we have to pick our battles where if we try to have the next expansion include 10 of these hypothetical systems, we'll do them all poorly. We want to make sure it has 3 of them really well.
And I guess with a game such a Path of Exile, where you want to take a skill and you want to try to make it as powerful as possible, making something powerful or as powerful as possible means that it has to separate itself from other skills. And if you try to normalize the game, you're pretty much taking away some of the identity of those skills as well.
Right.
So,
and I think it's totally fine for there to be like a number of good choices. Obviously, it's bad if there's just one good choice or 2 good choices. But I like the idea of there being 10 or 15 builds that people argue between and no one can make the right decision, as opposed to having 100 builds where no one's having any fun with any of them.
Yeah, that's definitely the gameplay I prefer as well. Normalization in general in games, unless it's like super competitive PvP, typically takes away some of the identity for me.
Do you still find that argument can hold, though, when you have a skill like, let's go to Glacial Hammer because it's fun to make fun of Glacial Hammer, you buffed it, and Ice Crash? The specialization of Glacial Hammer is that it has the, when mobs have less health, Froze and Cull. But the state of the game, most mobs will die in a very few amount of hits except for bosses. But Glacial Hammer's ability doesn't work on bosses. So you kind of have a skill that is a inferior version of another skill, and it has no specific design.
It's one of those things where this is an evolved system. We made Glacial Hammer, it had its place. Then we added Ice Crash, people enjoyed it. We have to be careful here where, so what I'm trying to say is, we can go through all the skills in the game and relatively quickly work out what we want to do to fix them, right? So there's improvements to Glacial Hammer that will fix the skill. The problem is that if we try to commit to doing all of that stuff simultaneously, it's going to take a number of expansions to put it in, or we're going to do a poor job with all those skills, or have an expansion which is entirely an attempt to revigorate old skills, which may not be what the game needs necessarily. So leaving Glacial Hammer how it is a somewhat intentional thing that if we can't do a job well yet, we're going to just wait and then fix it when we know we can do it properly in the future. So we want to make sure with melee, for example, that we get melee targeting sorted out. We want to make sure that there's consistent behavior with a lot of skills and that it's actually really fun to use each of the melee skills in isolation. Then the second problem we have to solve is the fact that Path of Exile's monster density and higher difficulties, stemming back to a decision I made a long time ago that higher difficulties should have more monsters than lower ones. This high monster density thing means that melee single target skills are inherently bad, right? Like if you're going to dual strike every monster in the map, it's not going to happen. So there has to be there has to be melee splash or something. And the problem is, if Melee Splash is Maddhatterui, then why not just make it part of Melee? Maybe. I mean, this is talking off the cuff here. I don't know if we're doing that, but
Yeah.
the point is that there needs to be a general system overhaul to do with monster density as well. Now, I don't want to reduce monster density. It's fun when there's tons of monsters to kill, but there needs to be a lot of work done on Melee in general before we take a step back and go, okay, is Glacial Hammer still bad? Oh, maybe it is. Then we fix that. So that's one of the reasons why we're holding off on very complicated skill reworks until we have the system rework in place first.
Do you guys ever consider like just completely trashing a skill and building it up from the ground, making it something entirely different?
There are a few skills. The problem is that the players, there are niche builds that use them. Like we experimentally discussed redoing Elemental Hit, phasing it out, having a better version. And the few players using Elemental Hit for some really niche reason said, no, please, I enjoy this. I come home from work to play Elemental Hit. Don't screw around with my skill.
Yeah.
You screwed around with Shock Nova, and I was upset with that one.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right? So that was a skill.
usable.
We look at the stats of Shock Nova and we say, no one's using that. But then when we change it to theoretically make it better, someone's upset that we changed the niche behavior that they were relying on it for.
True, but you do know with all decisions someone's going to get thrown under the bus, and that's unavoidable. You have to choose the demographic that gets sent under the bus.
Yeah. Well, the skill situation of Path of Exile is interesting because we've added skills for so many years. There's skills right from the beginning where Split Arrow only started looking good recently. You know, it had like 4 or 5 years of looking like a plain multi-shot attack. So there's skills.
You did buff it quite a bit that one patch, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's popular. So we have a lot of different types of skills. And if we took a step back and said, you know what, let's take all the skills away from the game, ruin everyone's characters at once, and put them all back at the right levels with the right ratios of, like making sure that this one's more powerful than that one and so on, it could be a better game. The problem is that's guaranteed to break every single build. And I reckon we'd lose 30% of our players rather than gain a percentage in that expansion. So we have to be careful. It might be better for the game, but, it's not something we can easily do.
Right. I mean, it seems kind of, it actually seems very, very tricky because you guys like the cyclical thing where you guys promote other skills, and that more or less either means you got to redo it or buff it in such a way that it motivates players to try it. And then at the same time, you try to bring the stuff that was strong from the previous league and kind of bring it down without breaking the function of the skill. But then that kind of screams, are you creating a power creep in such a way that over time, people are just getting stronger and stronger tools. These skills are just becoming better and the game is becoming easier. Is that?
I believe that is the case. And this can be solved by rebalancing, right? We can do the World of Warcraft thing where we take a step back and say, okay, these are the new monster damage and life values, and essentially just make the game numerically harder. And that's one way to balance, right? To take the weak things, make them better, not nerf the good things, and then occasionally make the game harder, which is a way of doing it. It's just a very roundabout way when the correct solution might be to knock a few points off the top skills. But you've seen what happens on Reddit when we do that. So it's it may be a ton more work to go the roundabout way, but it might be better for the company financially. It's tough to say.
Yeah.
Well, then going slightly tangent into what we were talking about with new content systems, where we started with the topic of Val skills. You've added the Sextants. Now, the Sextants were fairly promoted, at least in the promotional videos. I've seen a lot of use of them. They've been rebalanced a few times in terms of drop rates, and you did actually do the manifesto where you did kind of decide that Sextants aren't exactly where you want them to be, but you don't want them to be high quantity, high use items. You want them to more be specialized, and you're excited to find them. But with that, the concern that comes between me and at least a demographic of the community is when we saw the initial Sextants, the drop rates and what they did, we get confused in the quality assurance testing part of new leagues. And with every league, we can find an example of something that does not make sense, and it seems nobody did anything around it, at least actually physically playing it. What causes this to happen?
So when you're working on a project, you don't necessarily know how long it's going to take, and you have to pick a release date and lock it in for marketing reasons. And then if the project is too much work, and they often are because people have scope and they want to throw more stuff in and add more maps and more bosses, you can either move the release date, which ruins the aspirations of all the players that have taken time off work and means that you break promises as a company and waste all your marketing budget and all that kind of stuff. Or you can try to prioritize your efforts on the systems that you feel matter the most. And in this case, resources were not properly allocated to the Sextant system. Of all the things that can be broken in the first week, that was probably the one. And this may or may not have been the right choice. I mean, it disappointed some players, and it's only now that we're actually getting Sextant mods in that deserve to be there from the start. Let's not blame the quality assurance department, though. Their concerns with it were raised at the time and arguably, ignored in favor of us fixing other systems, right? There are producers like me who have to make decisions on what we focus our resources on. So it's definitely my fault over the quality assurance guys that certainly had their documenting the problems with sextants. In addition, there are some last-minute balance changes we made to the drop rates of sextants based on results from alpha. And part of this is, if sextants are in the right place, you'll get some red circles on your map and it looks cool. If you have slightly too many, you leave a trail of red circles as you progress through the atlas. And so you get these situations where there are 100 red circles on the atlas because you haven't quite played out each one of the sextant mods completely before you moved on. And that's it completely ruins how the atlas looks and feels, and players who encounter that disengage with the system really fast because their atlas is a complete mess and they ask, how do I turn off these sextants that I don't want anymore? And we really wanted to avoid that, because if by chance we're slightly too high in the first week and everyone gets an atlas like that, they're all stuck with it. And psychologically, this is a garbage system and it's a complete mess. Whereas if we go slightly too few, then at least it's something players can debatably say, is this good or bad? Why is it so rare? And we opted to go on that side and actually hit it under the mark slightly where it was quite a lot too few. And this is partly because of the way the drop system works. There are some limitations that mean that we kind of have to hit over or under here, and we are planning to rework that so we can control the sextant drop rates a lot more carefully.
Well then, so now that we have that there is the quality assurance, we have that those things are brought up, it's always very easy. But then do you find there can be issue with, in such a short development cycle, it's very easy to be overambitious with your projects, and that often you're just always trying to do a little bit too much, and that's causing things like the sextants to happen in the way they did?
Yes. And the thing is, the cost of this ambitious development cycle is not what you guys see. There's quality concerns on the product, of course, but the problem is that there's this elastic factor that game developers have, which is crunch time. The staff are very willing to put in very long hours. And the problem is, if a producer picks a project that's too large, then it's the staff who lose out. Not so much the players. The staff will guarantee the players get something fun to play, but they do that by working 10 or 15-hour days. And that's the thing that I want to address before the actual quality of the product. As bad as it sounds, my first responsibility is to my staff, because if I ruin their lives, that's a big thing. Ruining the game, of course, is people's entertainment, but the staffs are real people as well. So the thing that's gone on behind the scenes here is we have, in my opinion, dramatically improved the crunch situation between these last expansions, where with Ascendancy, there was a lot more overtime being done than with Atlas, where people were still working hard and doing long hours and everything, but it's nowhere near as bad. I see that as a major success, and it is a subtle thing where when we're trying to do scope improvement, to make sure expansions are correctly scoped out for the amount of time, that the primary motive that I have is making sure that we don't work the staff to death in the process. And so I think we've had a lot of success with that. Yeah, I mean, Atlas was still a little bit large for 3 months, and it's affected, some areas of it. But by and large, I think we mostly achieved the goals of making sure the staff enjoyed the process, as well as delivering something that was really close to everything that was shown in the marketing materials.
So then which one would have been the worst on the staff, in your opinion?
That's a good question. Ascendancy was pretty rough. We were almost going to release Ascendancy 3 months earlier. And by that, I mean, when we spec'd it out as a 3-month expansion for release alongside Talisman. And so it was very clear after we'd booked our press tour that while we have a labyrinth we can play through, this is not going to be a fun experience until we spend another 3 months just making the labyrinth more fun and adding more variety and redoing the Ascendancy classes that were terrible. And so we had to sit down and make a hard decision. Future of the company here. Are we releasing in December or are we releasing 3 months later in March? And we figured how screwed are we if we release in March? And we thought, the community will understand just getting Talisman. We can say we're doing a large, small release cycle. And that decision there of going large, small meant that we didn't overcommit to doing a big expansion every 3 months. And that has been very useful because right now with the December release, that's just a regular challenge league by itself and some other fixes. That is certainly going to be a lot of work, but it's not the same level of commitment as trying to pull another Atlas out in 3 months. Now, meanwhile, we're working on a big release for next year, of course, which the guys have been doing for quite a while in the background because it involves some new tile sets.
Nice. So, guys, let's talk a bit more about the new Essence League in specific. Hatchet, do you want to start this off?
You can go ahead first.
Okay, so we're seeing now that with the new essences, Chris, how do you feel that with the implementation of the new essences, so you can now craft rare items a little more reliably. How do you feel that puts rare items up against unique items? Are we seeing like a comeback for rare items here? What are the intention behind the essences here compared to uniques?
So there are two things that we're trying to achieve with the essence crafting. The first one is ideally having it so that there are some top-end rare items that are used more than the best-in-slot uniques that people were previously using. You know, the dream that instead of using some unique, someone's going to find a really cool essence mod and get lucky with crafting it and have a rare that competes with it. And then the second goal is during leveling, there are far more remedial processes that players can do, where if you've got low resistances or low life or something like that, you can waste a few essences to solve that problem. Now, for the second case here, we've undoubtedly succeeded, right? People are definitely using a lot of essences as they're leveling. The ratio of rare items that people have equipped is extremely high. They're dropping out of magic items much earlier. There's far less attrition of players as they play through the game. People's resistances are better, all that kind of stuff, right? That's basically what you get when you give people free rares. And that's working well to accelerate the process of people playing their subsequent characters. You know, if you die in hardcore, but you got a stash full of essences, like I currently do, then it makes your next character a bunch faster to play through. For the first question of what's happening in the end game, we are seeing some good essence crafting occurring, but it's probably still too early in the league to really judge whether or not this has actually had an impact on the rate that people are using uniques. I mean, certainly many of the top builds want a lot of strong uniques, and we don't yet have the data of whether there are more rares in those slots that specifically have essence mods.
So which of the essences have you seen so far being the most popular ones?
There was this boots essence, you know, the Ziggy D boots one.
Oh, God. The burning ground.
That should have been left as it was. I love that.
I don't have any strong data on which essences are most popular. We're planning on generating that kind of stuff this week, but I do know that the greed essence in hardcore, which gives flat life on armor pieces, is extremely popular, both anecdotally and based on what data I've seen.
I feel the essence of woe seems to be very, very popular as well, with the CI being very meta right now, and of course energy shield being crafted. But that's just anecdotal, of course. You don't have the statistics, so I don't suppose you know which ones are not very popular either.
I'm not sure yet, but I can imagine that ones like the minion ones only used by minion characters, or maybe only some of those minion characters. So there are ones that are specifically niche. But that's why there are 25 different types of essences, right? There's something for everyone. I mean, during the development of it, I was pushing for it to be more like 6 to 8 types of essences, but the team managed 25, and I think it is a stronger system because it certainly gives a lot of variety and doesn't create the feeling that I have to be maxing out all 6 of these. Now, 25 is too many to max out, so you have to pick your battles there.
So when will you typically balance these essences? When you have some statistics, are you going to wait until after the league, or can we like expect them during the league?
That's a good question. The tricky thing about balancing them is it kind of creates legacy items within a league, and we prefer to do that between leagues, especially if we're reusing the system again in the future. At the moment, we don't have any particularly strong balance concerns about the essence numbers. I think they were generally in the right ballpark. I mean, yes, some will be used less than others, but totally intentional, right? And maybe some do deserve buffs, but I don't think that's an emergency situation we need to increase yet. And if we do increase something numerically during a league, it trains the players not to use something, because if they feel it's weak, there's a chance that we'll buff it. And therefore, if we don't buff it, they're upset and waiting. And I can't play until you buff this thing. Come on, guys, you'd like to buff things that are bad. So.
Yeah.
So with the Essence League, do you guys worry that, with the leveling experience that you've had, essentially picking up a lot of customizable alts and stuff, that people will get accustomed to this leveling experience and this leveling power that you can get from these essences, and then the next league, you don't have this power, or you don't have this tool or resource, and you feel way worse? Do you think are you guys worried about that experience?
Do you feel this occurred with Perandus and its aftermath?
Well, I still feel like the Essence League was my easiest leveling experience. Perandus was definitely easy. You got a lot of great uniques for very, very cheap, but I don't know. From my experience, Essences has been by far the easiest, because I've been walking around with all rares. Anytime I needed resist, I could cap it. With Perandus League, I still had to make an effort of picking up coins and exchanging them for leveling tools, and I wouldn't be guaranteed the leveling tool that I need. I found the Essences to be a bit more useful for customizations and, filling out the holes in your gear without even having to trade, which is great. Most of people will take menial amounts of currency and trade them for, holes in their gear so that they can iron out their character and have a great leveling experience, which I think the Essence League did. But I do worry about the next league. People have these tools, and now it's all of a sudden, the game has changed again.
So I guess this also comes. The question here is: was the Essence system originally designed to remain in the game after the league end, or is this not something you can answer yet, Chris?
So we try to keep the decisions on that stuff till later. Like the team haven't even discussed whether Essence is staying, right? I have no idea. I mean, I honestly, I'd like it to, but at the same time, it is a relatively intrusive thing to find these groups of frozen monsters every now and then. So we have to find a way of balancing it. And systems like Talisman, for example, you can't tone down without changing the ratios. So with Essence, we'd have to probably do a similar thing.
Yeah, we actually. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, with regard to the the question of the leveling power assist, we like to do experiments. We like to see, does the game perform better? Do more people enjoy getting to maps? Do more people play second characters with a different set of rules? And we feel that experiment is worth the potential damage of training players that something is going to be the case. Like with Darkshrine, for example, we probably dropped a lot of high quality gems on the community. Maybe that has an effect on the standard economy, but it's something that we got a lot of data from. We understand what it's like if for an entire month there's something which feels exploitative. How long do people do this for? Do they stay up for 16 hours and do it? How does it, there's a lot of questions
they probably do.
that we have data for. Yeah, they liked that one. So with essences though, if it makes the game better, then we can achieve it in other ways. Like, for example, the right answer here might be another rare crafting method built into the game. Maybe cheaper master crafting. Maybe more rares. Maybe alks are 10 times more common. Who knows? There's options there if we like the system. Or maybe we have a way of just rolling essences in as they are.
Well, related to that, there was the nice phrase of make rares great again. And the Essence power allows you the very controlled single modification, which drastically increases the odds of getting something that is usable for you. Often I've seen builds utilizing a lot of the Essence material, or people crafting for the Essence material are just using stronger rares to accompany uniques rather than replace them. There are some of the corrupted mods, which are quite interesting, and I think we'll have to wait till later in the league if anyone can actually craft things. However, there just seems to be a lack of these are just powerful alks, and you're still using kind of similar ratios between your rares and your uniques. And that uniques still have this, they're so far beyond what rares can ever achieve in so many builds. I'm not seeing the Skyforth rare or the Abyssus rare or any of these things.
Yep, and this may be the case. We're going to have to see how it plays out. There's a lot of crafting time left in the league, and people will find better ways of getting tier 7 essences for crafting, right? Like right now, we're not seeing the behavior that we have predicted because we simulate out this stuff as much as possible. And there are efficient ways of crafting up a bunch of tier 7 essences that the players haven't quite hit. Like when doing our modeling, have worked it out to like a tier 7 essence per, I think I worked it out to 2 hours of game time. So correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, people may be getting them that quickly, but we believe that in the future there's going to be a lot more crafting with mods that actually do exceed existing ones. And if you can make a really good life armor that has more life than you can get on a rare, that might start to compete with things like belly or whatever else the character is using.
Mm-hmm. Are you guys, do you still go by the philosophy that you want rare items to have, like, that's like the really good, well-rolled rare items? Do you still want those to be typically better than uniques, or are you kind of happy that uniques have a best-in-slot type of approach?
I would prefer the rare items to be better, but the uniques provide interesting things. Like every unique is used not because of raw numerical supremacy, well, some may be, but generally because it does something to make your build interesting. Mm-hmm. And I prefer people to be using rares because rolling rares is a more addictive system. Mm-hmm. Using rares is a more true action RPG thing. But using a unique that provides an interesting thing that makes your build different that you can understand and plan around is also a good experience for the player.
I also think that uniques actually feel more rewarding to use sometimes. They feel more rewarding to obtain as well. At least that's the impression I get from when I talk to my guys in the chat and all that stuff. People get excited about the uniques. But of course, it shouldn't make it so that the rares become useless. But I'm not even that much against the idea of the uniques being competitive in that regard. But
Well, I was going to ask something related then. If you feel that you do want the rares to be kind of more substantial because it's like a bit of a truer ARPG experience, and you know that a lot of the uniques are just used because of surprise their unique properties, there's been a little bit of an addition on only the high end and a specific, like the Fear Essence, to allow some extra mods crafted through essences. And nonetheless, on most pieces, whenever you're crafting either fizz weapons, elemental weapons, if you're using armor pieces or energy shield, the process of prefixes and suffix you need is a pretty much standard once you know it. Why isn't then more done related to making rares just have more interesting properties that uniques don't necessarily have and can come up more uncommon? Like you added the flat chaos roll, which is an uncommon mod that appears at, I believe, eye level 83. Instead of
So we do like the idea of adding more to the rare pool, but we also want to make sure that the mods on rares fit the criteria of being mods on rares. And there can be ones that uniques don't have that we can put there, but they're very unlikely to be particularly build-defining ones. So we're kind of trying to experiment with stuff where the Fear Essence is a good example. What is it like if rare items can get these relatively esoteric, unique item-like properties on them? How understandable is it for players? How does it affect the searchability of them on PoE.trade? How does it cause the identity of rares to change? And so Essence is one of those steps to experiment with that. We have to release 4 challenge leagues a year, so we'll have a lot of opportunity to experiment with different itemization methods.
Siggy, I think, mentioned the last time he was on this podcast that you were experimenting with the idea of having like a specific unique that would be like best in slot. I don't like that word, but for each specific ascendancy. So like we have the brass dome for the Juggernaut, for instance. Is this something you guys are working on right now?
I believe that there are many of these prototyped up, but that we aren't accelerating the release of them. Okay. And this is partly because we're experimenting with what type of uniques are correct to put in the game. Mm-hmm. And it may be that while these are very cool for those classes, the more best in slot stuff is not great. Yeah. So there's a lot of review process. I mean, there's so much split decisions and opinions that go on with uniques in the team, right? Like, I personally do not like high-level weapon uniques. I feel that every time we release a weapon above about level 60, that it invalidates rare crafting on that particular type, right? Something like Reach of the Council means...
Oh, no, not my stuff. Chris doesn't like my stuff.
The existence of each item like that hurts the entire crafting process of weapons. Like, are people really making rare bows these days? I mean, it's less common than it was before. Having said that, a lot of players love these powerful, unique items, and a lot of supporters wanted to design them, and in the end we decided, let's make them. Ignore Chris's, philosophical complaints in the background there. The right thing to do is to make them because they're powerful and fun, and people will enjoy using them. It makes supporters happy. It makes, having chase stuff to find, especially iconic weapons, is an important part of the game, and so they're in. But we have a lot of different opinions, and there are split opinions about the Ascendancy uniques as well.
So, Starforge is... How did that end up happening, or do you want to comment on that sort?
So the Shaper is the top content in the game, and he needs some good items, and that's pretty much as far as I've heard. In fact, honestly, I have not read the stats on the sword, right? Since the release, I haven't had time to sit down and read what it does. And this is because there are teams of people that I fully trust to work on that stuff.
Fair.
With the difficulty of the Shaper, you better fucking drop some good items. I've died too many times in there to not get a good item, so...
Well, you don't do balance, so we try to avoid those questions.
Yeah. Imagine what would happen if we released this and said it all builds up towards a Shaper. If you can kill these 4 sub-bosses and get the thing, and then, have the Shaper instance work correctly for you, and you get to the Shaper, and you fight him, and then all the uniques available are garbage. People would have no motivation to even play the Atlas, right? So there has to be something punchy there. It's much better to come out on the high side than it is to come out on the low side and just deal with the power creep.
Well, in a similar fashion, though, just in talks of general balance, not the specific one, you created things like a Series Flask and then the Shaper Flask, which has a more generic use. The point of a loot table is to allow you to have more loot options, and having a more expansive loot table then allows you to create things that are more specific to builds and archetypes rather than having to put in something so generically powerful so that so many people can use it and not find it disappointing. And this comes down to Val Haste. Val Haste is within the Val skills so that everybody can play a Val skill. You have something like Val Haste, and it seems that that's what was done with the Shaper drops rather than making specific, interesting, powerful uniques. You just went and like broad, generic damage stats. Yay. Now you haven't looked at it, and so we're trying not to use the specific examples, but more it's the difference between specialized uniques and having a loot table, because you have a loot table so there's multiple drops, rather than just power for the sake of power.
Right. Well, it's an ongoing process within our company improving the uniques we release, and unfortunately, it's not quite as simple. Even if we put rules down, we still have 100 or so custom uniques for supporters that are in various stages of them having suggested ideas or us being half finished with making it, and so we can't really change the rules because we both have existing uniques in the game that exist and ones that we're in the process of making where we can't really change it around too much on those supporters, as well as different designers here who honestly want the ability to flex their creative muscle. So Path of Exile will probably have good uniques, bad uniques, and a wide variety of different design motivations behind them in the future, and we'll just have to kind of have them coexist as part of the metagame. Thankfully, they're items which not everyone can just pick on a tree, so there's a scarcity issue, and we can, if needed, balance around scarcity. Or in the past, we've experimented with challenge leagues that don't have uniques present. Like in the very first challenge league, you couldn't find Kalm's Heart. That was an experiment of what would happen if Kalm's didn't exist, because it was dominating the life metagame at the time. And so we may return to that in the future now that we have a lot of uniques of going, you know what, here's the set that don't exist in this league. Go and come up with some new builds.
Pretty cool. I've been thinking about that a few times as well. I'd really like that. It would, mix up the meta, of course. But I'm kind of curious as well, Chris. I read in the development manifesto, I think it was Carl who wrote this here, that Atlas has been a huge success so far in terms of the map progression. Is this something you could talk about? Like, how do you guys see it being successful?
So in the past, the map system was very much hey, you finish the game, so now there's some maps, and basically put them in the machine, get some random ones out, and no one's keeping track of what you've done. The maps in your stash are your progress, but if they're gone, it's like you never played any of them, because your progress is gone. There's nothing permanent. You get this feeling of, well, it's basically a slot machine. Like, it really is a slot machine.
Yeah.
You put the tokens in and you get some different tokens out. And by its very nature, it has to be a little bit lossy. But then people can roll the stuff and invest currency from elsewhere and so on and so on. So there was no tracking of that. So we've added a player rewards program on top of that, essentially, the casino rewards thing, where you get the ability to track how much of this you've done and have various different completion objectives. And it's working like it does in real life. People like ticking stuff off. And in this case, thankfully, we're not, eating someone's savings. We're, providing entertainment because they get to have fun fighting through the maps. But it's having the desired effect where people will play through from map to map, tick the progress off. They'll gradually have the ability to shape maps to upgrade them. They find interesting stuff. We're seeing so much more engagement with high-end maps that isn't coming through just the fact that maps are easier to get now. It's also the fact that people actually have a motivating factor. Previously, you kind of dabble in the first few tiers of maps and then say, well, that's my character over. But now people push a lot further into the center where they previously weren't doing before.
It definitely feels much more rewarding. And that comes from someone who had played this game so much. And I was kind of, starting to get a little burned out on the endgame progression. But just, even though it's still maps and you do the same thing as you did before, the progression just makes it feel so much more rewarding and so much more interesting to progress in. And that's, of course, it's also something to do with the new tile sets, making it have this fresh experience. How did you guys come up with the idea that it was tile sets necessarily? Was that simply just to give people a new feeling, a new freshness to the game, or?
In the Awakening expansion, we introduced a couple of new tile sets, like the channel one, that were based on existing art that we already had. You do the trick if you're taking the aqueducts and saying, it's daytime, look, and then it feels different. Yeah. And that's what all of the new stuff in Atlas is. Everything is a color shifted or environment shifted or careful combination of existing stuff. I mean, sure, Ramparts, for example, does have the cool trick of you going up the top, but that's using tech we already had. Because our entire tile set creation budget right now is focused on another expansion, we had to do all of the Atlas stuff with only marginal changes. Now, in some cases, they required some time. Like, people may not appreciate the amount of work that went into the what's it called? The Arachnid Tomb, I think?
Yep.
That's my favorite map.
The spider one. So there's spider webs everywhere, and that's cool. Like, we like the Arachnid Tomb. That's going to get used again somewhere. With a lot of effort went into that. And so basically here, we knew that people reacted so positively to the Awakenings, new tile sets, despite not really being new tile sets, their color shifts and so on. It's just a breath of fresh air for the players. It's the opportunity to play through something in a different way. And content reuse has to be king in Path of Exile. We started out with a tiny team, and the only reason we were able to make an action RPG was based on the fact that action RPGs allow massive content reuse, random levels, random monsters, and so on. Every monster in the game is used as a map boss somewhere and in various different forms. And the same thing is true for every art asset. We add a new area to the game. It's going to be used in maps. It's going to be used as a Val side area. You get the idea.
Yeah.
And so it's basically playing on that. Is the reason we added a lot more tile sets to the Atlas system.
Yeah.
On that note, with the new tile sets, you guys revisited a lot of old bosses, or shifted the bosses around and gave them new abilities. We've noticed actually new mechanics where if you curse the crit boss, you take like a devastating projectile to the face. And then you have, the Goatman, which does a deadly leap slam. You just need to get out of the way. And then you have that grace period. You guys are playing with different mechanics. And, we talked to Ziggy and said that there are plans for more, adjustments, but is that something that we could look for in this expansion, or is it just going to come over time with the release of, future leagues and expansions?
I would expect to see adjustments like that coming out of future releases. There's overhead to putting stuff in patches, and our goal, like in the past, we released weekly or bi-weekly or every 3 weeks updates involving new skills and so on, because the game was seriously lacking a lot of content. But right now, doing that kind of release schedule, and we're still doing several patches a week for minor things, but doing the kind of release schedule where we aggressively introduce new map bosses right now has so much overhead associated. It runs more risk of slowing things down or breaking stuff, and it doesn't get a proper QA cycle and so on. So we'd rather put it in the next expansion, have plenty of time for it to sit on our testing server and get played over time before it's actually released.
Yeah, I mean, for somebody that's been playing so long, it's really refreshing to not know what's going to be at the end of this, this map, and being very familiar with the layouts. It's just, all in all, it's just great stuff for
the guys put a ton of effort into the map bosses there. It was like 80% of the design effort from the team went into studying the map bosses. And I remember vividly the meeting we had at the beginning of Atlas where we said, let's do all these new maps. We're going to do 30 maps. We're going to do this system here. And everyone said 30 new maps. That's a lot of new bosses. And someone else said, yeah, and the existing bosses are crap. We're going to have to redo half of those. And so most of the scoping for Atlas was boss creation. The map guys can make the tile sets. That's no problem. They've got that onto an art. They're really good. But making bosses is a constant challenge to come up with new interesting mechanics. And so the guys did a really good job of getting a ton of them in there in time.
So going then to the Atlas creation focus in Endgame, one of the statements was, changing everything you would know about Endgame. And no one can argue that there has been a lot of work done with bosses. There's been some fantastic designs. There's been some great mechanics that have been added into. And it's nice that, it's not, hey, that mob with an auto attack. Cool. So, but at the same point in time, we still have the same map rolling system. We still have a very similar, just in style of how we clear, the progression is gated through a secondary mechanic of the Atlas, but it's still, run a map, make sure it has pack size, drop a map, run the map, make sure it has pack size. Did you guys, why didn't you guys consider taking a look at the map modifications, and does more need to happen with the construct that is maps that you have?
More probably does need to happen. We were very careful to not change too much at once, because when we're designing a system like Atlas, there are two ways it can go. It can be good or it can be bad. If it's good, that's great. We've ticked off another expansion. People are happy. Retention improves. That's actually what happened, so that's good. If it's bad, everyone says, okay, well, that was garbage. I hate this. I'm not going to play anymore. And then overnight, we've killed the game. Literally, this could be the most dangerous expansion if it turned out to be a terrible system that people weren't enjoying. And we're sitting there saying, do we even want to release this, right? Maybe we just keep the old game. It was fine. We're making money. We're getting paid. It's working well. The company's, growing at a reasonable rate and everything's fine. Why rock the boat? Why release the system? But in the end, we liked it enough that we were confident doing so because we weren't changing the fundamentals of maps. If you close your eyes and pretend the Atlas isn't there, then yes, there are a couple of small differences to how it makes your progress slightly different. But at the end of the day, you're still doing a map, getting some more maps, playing those, and climbing the tiers, except it's controlled by diagram that you can't see. So we wanted it so that if someone hates the Atlas itself, they can still continue to play the game a lot like it was before. Now that we know it's successful, it may be that we can change the core mechanics of how maps drop potentially in the future.
Has there been something then that you designed part of it, or you just got to the concept that you were just, this is too big of a risk. We kind of want to try it, but we can't risk the player base with that decision?
Yeah, there are some interesting ones. We're doing another big risk for an expansion next year that should be pretty cool. I think you guys will know when you see it, and it should be interesting.
You use your own company as like a giant focus group, right?
There's a lot of Path of Exile players here.
Yeah,
it's very easy for people. So I pitched at a meeting to the company last week what we're doing for some of the content next year. And the people were psyched. Like that, as far as a pep talk goes, just going, okay, this is the content we're making. That works incredibly well. Like way more so than the Atlas system or the Labyrinth. People said, oh, cool, we'll make that. That's good. But for this one here, it just really excited people. Like my wife, who does her accounting, came to me and said, I'm so excited about that stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, you've never played Path of Exile before. How did this excite you?
Yeah.
So there's some cool things going on.
Nice. Look forward to that.
So,
Hedgie.
I just wanted to bring up one of the community concerns with the age-old life versus CI. It seems to be a very popular, hot topic, and I'm sure you're aware that the Shaper has been killed in such a way that CI characters can utilize different tools such as like Vault Discipline and just crazy amounts of damage to cheese one of the hardest bosses in the game. How do you guys feel about this ongoing war, life versus CI? We've heard Path of Exile, Path of CI, Path of Melee, Path of Block. It kind of goes in its cycle.
It's always black and white.
Yeah, I would like to hear, your comments on that.
It's good for there to be debate about which one is better, especially as it changes from one to another over time. And we feel it's very healthy for the game to change its identity like this. And Path of Life Nodes wasn't that many years ago, and we'll probably make a mistake to accidentally Path of Life Node it back up again. I mean, we have literally discussed restoring Calm's heart to its old stats in the last month.
Oh, snap.
Oh shit.
You heard it first.
There are things in progress that may...
Everybody's selling their legacy Calms.
Oh dear. So the point is, though, there's even debate among the team about this life versus CI thing. So I went to the guys and I go, look, I'm going on this podcast, and one of the topics they're going to definitely talk about is life versus CI with regard to the Shaper stuff, what's going on. So guys, what's going on? What can you tell me? And I wasn't expecting an argument about which was better, if you see what I mean. But it happened. There were people saying, actually, they're wrong. There's a ton of good life stuff going on now. They're just misinformed. And so regardless of whether those particular people are right, maybe the community wisdom is righter, there's still a lot of debate and a lot of reason to potentially roll life characters. Yeah. Having said that, it's pretty clear that CI is certainly popular at the moment, and the community likes Flavor of the Month a lot. Once something is deemed to be correct, they're going to play it, it's powerful, and that will cause people to complain that it's too powerful. Typically...
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go on.
It's just one of those things that happens when there's a meta and there's some popular people playing some builds, and then all of a sudden you start to say the same thing and it gets blown way out of proportion. I completely disagree that life is bad or that CI is the best.
I want to call bullshit.
There's some
on
concerns.
All of this. and here's the reason. You have one-shot mechanics. And if you can over-health those one-shot mechanics, the difference between taking, for example, Uber series lightning hit and not being able to take the lightning hit is the ability to just stack damage and face tank the fight, or the ability that any fuck up is death. Now, when you talk about like the Shaper encounter, yes, a life-based build has killed it with a support in hardcore, and life-based can do it. But any situation where you can out-health a one-shot cough-cough volatiles in high-tier maps, your energy shield is going to give you so much more room for mistakes. And that's where the problem comes in.
I personally feel that the problem comes with, strong tools like Vault Discipline, being able to chain them, use them for sketchy situations, just sustaining an insane amount of pool, while you have life-based builds that have Vault and Mortal Call, which is, I guess, couldn't be considered life based because it's on the left side with the endurance charges. It has the endurance charge synergy, but that has been left in the dust, for so long. But yeah, I mean, the tools like Vol Discipline, it brings so much safety, and I just wonder, as the designer, I'm guessing it's Rory that designed the Shaper fight. When he watches, somebody face tank all the mechanics, is he dying a little inside? Is he like, oh, my masterpiece, somebody's found a way to cheese it?
Well, let's just say the person who primarily designed the Shaper fight was the person who was most strongly arguing that life is actually probably more viable at the moment. So that was very interesting.
But I mean,
there is another.
So go ahead.
There is another point with the life versus CI thing that we can see statistically which people are doing. And typically what happens is starting out in a league, people don't have the good items needed to sustain CI characters. They don't have their shavs or whatever, or their high, CI good rares. And
low life
the high
before
EX
you
rares.
catch the error. Low life is shavs. CI's
Right.
just high regalias.
Yep. Sorry, you're right. This shows that I have not played a CI character before on the life realm. So statistically, though, in terms of people stacking life, which is something we can track, we see that life is predominant early in leagues, and later in the leagues, there's a big shift towards CI as people have really ramped up their wealth in the game and they want to try those kind of builds. In this league here, it was a much quicker ramping up. People generally played more life for their early characters, but the transition to CI was much faster. Essences, knowing that the build from last league was probably untouched from the, crazy balance nerfs that we did all over the place.
Mm-hmm. I just feel like if you look at the ladders, it's not like it's only CI characters that's up there. So,
Well, I think in general the community does, and I apologize because I'm trying to speak for the community. There isn't an issue in philosophy, I don't think, with anyone of having maybe CI having an advantage or having life an advantage. But there are abusable ways to get CI life pools above well over 15,000 without legacy gear, especially if you're going to consider parties. And then life-based builds struggle and sacrifice everything to get like 8k. And you're like, yay! I can still get one shot by everything threatening, whereas CI builds can just walk through it. Fantastic.
I mean,
I'm sure
maybe
every member of the
suck,
balance
PT.
every member of the balance team will listen to this part of the podcast, and they are working on at least plans for what they want to change in the future. Now, there's a lot of other environmental stuff. Like, for example, when we were introducing ascendancies, they solved a lot of issues that we had, but we couldn't talk to the community about, hey guys, well, we're doing this thing called ascendancy classes. We'll tell you more about it later, but it solves various balance things we've been working on. So there are reasons why certain changes are slow, because of future systems. Having said that, this is a difficult question. This is a difficult question to solve. Sorry, my voice is giving out.
Yeah. And you don't do the balance, so you did have to liaison us information, and it's not fair to really push you on that one. And that's fine, but it's still a huge concern.
I'm sure they're aware of it.
I feel, Chris, with your voice dying and we are nearing the end here, I feel like we should, I want to ask you guys if there's something near the end here that you want to talk about. Chris, had your PT, because then we don't want to take more of your time, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you go first, Hedgie. You say something, then I'll...
Remember, we don't have much time. Chris needs to go within too long.
I can stay a little bit longer if there's still questions you want to ask.
Okay.
Cool. We will milk any time you give us. We won't lie. Okay. Anytime you're willing, we'll take.
You guys announced...
Let's keep going for a little bit.
You guys announced some, pretty awesome news that you guys are evolving your code into better platforms like DX11 and then later on down the road, DX12. With performance improvements, are you guys going to revisit some old mechanics that were taken out because of performance issues? You've had like particle density, mob density, fracture. Those things were pretty cool and interesting, but you guys removed them for, good reason. People weren't getting a very positive experience, but as your engine becomes better, are you going to be pushing harder for, exciting things? And will that be an avenue of possibly restoring some of the COC power, maybe reducing its millisecond delay to like 300 instead of the old 100, instead of 500 that it is now?
So I just want to go on record to say that while we are working on a DirectX 11 version, we currently don't have any plans to support DirectX 12. So the community shouldn't have an expedition. It's slower unless you put $1 million of work in, is the short version there. But it's because it's more powerful if you've got a team of 30 guys working on it, which we don't. Okay, so to answer your actual question here, in general, yes, if we can get the game to perform at a level where the players are happy, then we'll definitely increase the fidelity of how fast we're doing various things or how good the particles are and that kind of stuff. We have a way to go before enough people are happy with performance on all of their characters. So the other thing to note is that a few of the issues here, like the cast on crit time, do conflate server and client performance together. While it has a client performance effect, our servers are also getting destroyed by the builds that people are playing. Like, the number of people we can fit on a server has decreased by like 60% in the last couple of years based on the fact that people are doing builds that just hit so many monsters so many times and do so much stuff. Like,
Okay.
It's fascinating, really, how much more it's costing us per player compared to before, without the actual technology changing. We've only been improving it, but the amount of more complicated things happening in the game, and combined with the slightly increased monster density over time as more people are playing in maps, it does have the side effect of causing server load. Now, we can solve this by throwing money at it. It's completely paralyzable, right? Like, if previously we could fit, say, 1,000 people on a server, and now we can fit 500, which are round numbers and not accurate, but if we want to do this, we just have to buy twice as many servers, and people don't interfere with each other on the servers. It's not causing lag spikes or anything, but it does require us to pay twice as much money to the server hosts per month. Now, we can't afford to, the game is going well financially, so that's not a problem. We're happy to, trade people's supporter packs for server time. It's what they're for. But if we can find a way of solving the server load issue, which is through some very subtle balance changes occasionally and, improved technology, then it will make the company a lot more able to add content with that money instead of just using it to buy CPU time.
Well, one of the things you even mentioned before, though, was that high-density packs were causing issues in other forms, drop rates or whatever. So this seems to be another argument towards, though you have wanted the idea of the further you get, the higher the mob density, and people want to kill things, wouldn't a smaller mob density solve this problem as well as many other balance problems running into?
It certainly would, but then that's a very dangerous change to make. I mean, I could just imagine that. Let's say we explain to the community members who are paying attention, look, we've reduced mob density because it makes single target less viable. It makes the game really spammy performance-wise. I mean, more mobs is more, hit effects, more particle effects being played and that kind of stuff. And it also causes us server performance problems. So we've reduced it, and now we're saving money, which we can spend on content. The game performs better and balances a lot better. Some people would say, great, that sounds like a good thing. And other players would say, weird, the game's really empty now. I don't understand what's going on. Yeah. I'm just not interested. And I suspect that's like 80% of players, unfortunately. And none of them are listening to the podcast because there's two tiers of players. There's people who just play to have fun, that don't engage with what we say. And that's great. Yeah. And then there's the people who are actually active community members. We love you all. You're listening to the podcast. We like the fact that you pay attention and everything.
But your opinions are dumb.
Your opinions are all good.
Yeah. Hey. Well, with the talk of like netcode and, the server stuff, like when I had the pleasure of making my unique, I was told that we could try to experiment with some experimental effects like knockback distance, but I was told that the programmers relayed that it wasn't going to feel good with desync. Now that you guys have lockstep, like what do you guys consider the standard to be when you're designing a mechanic or designing, like what do you determine is fair?
Well, we have to be careful here because 15% of players are still playing on predictive mode, and while it's a better predictive mode than there was in the past,
I'm sorry, did you say 15 or 50?
15.
Okay.
So 85 are on lockstep. I actually tried my hardcore character that I played. This league was on predictive mode by accident. Now, this wasn't what killed me. That was being dumb. But I was playing on predictive mode up until about level 60 without noticing, and that's how close predictive mode is now, which is really good. I couldn't tell it wasn't lockstep. In fact, it felt better than lockstep because there wasn't the 50 millisecond delay on my actions. So we have improved it a lot, but we have to bear in mind that something that causes desync, like potentially certain uses of knockback, could be a bad experience for people playing in predictive mode, especially because those predictive mode users generally are those with higher latency. It auto-selects lockstep if you have low latency. So high latency combined with desync-prone things produces a bad experience, and having 15% of the players be upset with the experience would be bad. So we're still careful that while desync is mostly fixed, we can't design things in that would work badly with it.
Okay.
Well, one of the things that we didn't really have as much time to talk about was some of the newer players' experience. You touched on a bit how, since the Atlas was focused on endgame, the essences would help touch on the new game experience. One of the things related to what we were discussing right before the podcast, with Magic the Gathering, a huge thing, and anyone who's streaming always gets this question, the difference between increased and more. Magic the Gathering uses a keyword system, and your game very much does use a keyword system where you have a phrase that means a very specific thing outside of its, literal English definition. Why don't you have these fonts bolded? Because if someone sees like a bolded or a highlight color, it indicates that it's a different mechanic and that there is something very specific to the phrasing. And instead, you just have everybody assuming increase and more is the same thing for fairly, insubstantial reasons.
We have a system prototyped up in the office where if you press Alt on an item, currently it shows the item level. And the intention with the new system is that it explains any mechanics on the item that are weird. And this is aimed at stuff like consecrated ground, for example, where you have to Google it to see what it means. And we haven't currently applied it to more versus increase because that affects a lot of items, but we could do if needed. And so this is something we're playing with. We have our China launch coming up in the near future, and we have added this system because there are a lot of new players there, and the game is very overwhelming to be dumped in with all of this content at once. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to try it out on that audience and see whether they like the alt text explaining mechanics and so on. So it could be used. I mean, it can easily be enabled on our realm in 2.5.0, for example, and that could help in this situation if a player knows to press Alt. Mm-hmm. Now, we could, of course, have a tutorial where we teach the player to press Alt, on basic items.
I vote +1 on the tutorial.
I think that sounds like a really good idea. Like, I get a lot of comments on, like, the very basic guides I do on YouTube that these have been, they've definitely made a difference in how much people have enjoyed and would continue to play the game, right? But I have one question here, the end. So as Grinding Gear Games, you guys have expanded upon the action RPG genre since the launch. You have the different skill gem system, you have the mapping system, and in 2.2 you also introduced the labyrinth. I'm curious, like with the pioneers, if we should put it like that, what kind of design spectrums do you have envisioned for the future of Path of Exile? Like what else can the action RPG genre and GTG do to evolve the genre?
There's a thing we're doing next year that we think is kind of new. Like when we've described this to a couple of people, they've said, no other game would try to do that. And I'm keeping this incredibly vague. Like I can't say what it is because it's time for a later. Yeah. It's for a later announcement. But it is pretty wacky, and I think it will help solve a problem in action RPGs that our game has that other games have not solved well. Mm-hmm. And an example here, and it's not at all related to flasks, but an example, 100% not an itemization flask thing.
Okay.
But, and I don't mean that as a wink. It actually isn't related to flasks. Okay. Anyway, point is.
So it flasks. Is related to flasks.
We got it. Read you loud and clear.
Yeah, confirmed.
Oh dear. Now when we don't release any changes to flasks, people are going, I'm pretty sure you promised that.
We're just going to use your quotations and apply it to everything, like, changes applied.
Okay, so example, Diablo 1 and 2 and Titan Quest and various other games had potions that you drink. You get a lot of them, right? Like you go to town and in Titan Quest you buy like a stack of 80, and in Diablo 1 and 2 you fill your inventory and belt full of potions. You go out in the world, and whenever you're taking damage, if you need life, you're just pushing the potion key. And so the next generation of action RPGs had to solve this because no one liked that. We said, well, we don't have gold, so you're not buying potions. Let's go with this flask system that refills on kill. And Diablo 3 added the red orbs on the ground that you get during combat, which is like getting life on kill, but done in a slightly more indirect way. Mm-hmm. And so we prefer the way that we did it because we like our game. And we feel this is the case of different companies solving the same problem in different ways. And the system that we're looking into the future is another way of solving an existing problem in a different way than other people have.
Okay. Well, interesting. I guess we'll just have to look forward to that.
Was there anything that you wanted to kind of share indirectly that we aren't having to ask a question or indicate, or something you want to chat about while you have a bit more time?
I think we've mostly communicated everything that we wanted to communicate recently. I mean, it's tough after the release of an expansion because the only things to talk about are either what we're doing immediately to fix problems in the expansion, which we've tried to put in a manifesto post as soon as it's decided on, even if it's a week or two before it's coming out, or things that are coming out in the future that we can't talk about.
All right.
And I wish we could, but the marketing schedule just means that we have to be very careful to, A, only talk about things we know are actually going in. Otherwise, you get those problems where developers overpromise stuff for years and years, and then none of it's in the released game. And B, journalists want to hear something that is exclusive to them so that they can announce it to the community and, have people read their articles and enjoy going through their content. And that works well for us because we get to, have their readers hear about our game and so on. So we have to keep a lot of cards close to our chest until it's time to announce it.
I have one last question, if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
You guys are planning to release 2 skills mid-league. Well, we don't know when, but if that is a success as far as player retention, is this something that you guys will continue to do going forward?
Sure. We used to release skills during the leagues, like I mentioned earlier, and those patches had minor drops associated with the retention. I think it's because it was making it confusing, and we pushed them pretty hard, and it just probably wasn't the right time for it then. We'll release these because we're keen to get them out. We were hoping to get them to 2.4.0. I mean, if things go badly with finishing them off, maybe they slip to 2.5.0. I can't promise it's in 2.4.0, but our current goal is to release them in the near future. Essentially, the story behind those skills is there were 2 channeling skills that we were working on, and we weren't particularly happy with the final state of either of them, right? They were good, they're fine, but we want them to be better than that. We feel they can be better with a bit more work. And then whenever we mentioned channeling, people said, you better have a laser skill, channeling. And so we're thinking, crap, we don't have a laser skill. That's a problem. So
how did you not have a laser skill?
Well, there was a prototype, but it wasn't anywhere near finished. So the third skill probably might be a laser skill. And we may have added that one in order to not get the outburst of what? What do you mean there's channeling skills that aren't lasers? So this is something we'll be talking about more in the news. I don't even know what form the laser skill is taking, right?
I'm pretty sure you're
already become the shaper and do that big plasma beam. Archon, yeah.
I'm pretty sure you're already screwed admitting that you weren't planning the laser.
Nice.
That's no winning here.
I think the guys had already prototyped up a laser skill. It just wasn't. Okay, so the tricky thing with lasers is the following. Imagine you're taking your laser and you're sweeping it across the playfield, right? Mm-hmm. So you quite rapidly sweep from point A to point B that are, say, 100 degrees apart. And this is occurring over, say, 5 or 6 server frames, which are 30 milliseconds each, because you swung quite rapidly. If you go from one side of a monster to the other side of a monster, you expect to have hit that monster as you swung through it, because you moved your mouse in an arc. But on the server, it did some damage on one side, not to the monster, and to the other side, not to the monster, and didn't hurt it. So you have a whole pile of hard math, and this gets bad, and people start to cry. And they're working it out. It's not a problem. I mean, we've had to do this for the piety beam situation elsewhere in the game, so you can't, dodge between it. But this is the reason why laser skills are harder than they sound, and the reason why the prototype didn't get past a prototype initially, because we saw it was fun, but it's a lot of work to make it actually releasable. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I can't promise anything in particular with the skills. This discussion of one of the 3 stopping being a channeling skill and being a regular skill, I'm not quite sure how it's going to end up. But the point is, 3 skills currently in development. When they're ready, we'll release them. It's unlikely to be in the next week, and there's a chance they may get moved to 2.5.0 if we feel it's for the best.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
So then, what TV show accompanied your hardcore experience?
Unfortunately, I was paying a lot of attention during that, which made it all the more embarrassing to die.
You knew it was going to happen, Chris.
It's okay. We're talking about Paity's laser beam. That killed me the other day.
My death was bad, so I made it through Merciless with very little lightning resist. The entire time thinking, I'm completely screwed. What am I doing? Why do I have so many topaz flasks? This is bad. So I'm actively trying to upgrade my lightning resist, but I've got one of those annoying situations with the itemization where I can't quite swap it around to get better lightning resist without burning all of my essences, and I kind of feel that I can make it through and just luckily find a good rare. It's a problem. It's all capped apart from lightning, and it's been okay. I've made it through Act 3, and it's time to fight Piety. And I think to myself, okay, what does she do in terms of lightning? Let's have a think about this. Well, I know she's got a fire form, and I know she's got a cold form. I specifically remember us adding those. There was a lot of design discussion. There was cool concept art. I remember the marketing. And does she have any lightning attacks? Well, the other form of piety uses ball lightning. Does this one use ball lightning? I can't remember her using ball lightning. I just fought her twice in the previous difficulties. She uses lightning ball. Maybe that's her lightning attack. Okay, let's give this a go. Died in 1 second.
Yeah.
Lightning storm.
Well done.
And I had to Piety not too long ago either, but the embarrassing thing was it wasn't merciless.
So. At least you didn't die to Hilly.
Yeah, that's true. I guess that trumps all. All right, Chris, we don't want to take more of your time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's been very interesting and very enlightening. We really do appreciate that.
You're welcome, guys. I had a great time. Thanks for the good questions.
So
thank you for the thorough answers.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
So for you new viewers out there who could be interested in Path of Exile, it is a free-to-play game that you can download on pathofexile.com or by finding it on Steam. Is there anything else they should know here, Chris?
Try it out.
Try it out. There you go. Also, if you didn't catch tonight's show live, guys, you can watch the VOD on Hegemony's YouTube. And we do this podcast every Sunday live on this channel. And if you want to catch the next one, make sure to give this channel a follow. And we will then see you guys again next Sunday. Take care.
Ciao.
See you later.